Hi, I'm Daphne. I'm 32 years old, and I work as a graphic designer in Portland, Oregon. I live in a small apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. I drive a 10-year-old Honda Civic that makes weird noises when I turn left, and I survive mostly on coffee and determination. Most people would say I'm the ordinary sister in my family. Not the successful one, not the favorite one. Just ordinary. But here's something curious that I'll tell you right now, though you won't understand its significance until the very end of this story. My grandmother used to make me count coins with her every Sunday afternoon when I was little. Not bills, just coins. She'd dump this old mason jar full of quarters, dimes, nickels, and pennies onto her kitchen table, and we'd sort them into neat little piles. "Daphne," she'd say in that soft voice of hers, "small things add up to big things if you're patient enough." I thought it was just a quirky grandmother thing. I had no idea she was teaching me the most important lesson of my life. It was a Tuesday morning in October when everything changed. The rain was coming down hard against my apartment windows. Typical Portland weather that makes you want to stay in bed forever. I was hunched over my laptop, working on a logo design for a local coffee shop, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Whitmore and Associates, which didn't ring any bells until I answered. "Miss Daphne Richardson?" The voice was professional, slightly nasal, with that particular tone lawyers use when they're about to deliver news that will change your life. "Yes, that's me. This is Robert Whitmore. I'm calling regarding your grandmother, Eleanor Richardson's estate. I'm sorry for your loss." My heart sank. Grandma Eleanor had passed away 3 weeks ago, and I was still processing the grief. She'd been sick for months, but somehow I thought she'd pull through like she always did. She was that kind of woman, tough as nails, sharp as a tack, and stubborn enough to argue with death itself. "Thank you," I managed to say, though my voice cracked a little. "I need to inform you that there will be a reading of the will this Friday at 2 p.m. at our offices. Your presence is requested." I was surprised. I loved my grandmother dearly, but I never expected to be included in her will. After all, I was just the granddaughter who visited every few months, brought her groceries sometimes, and listened to her stories about the old days. My sister Victoria was the one who lived in the big house in Lake Oswego, the one with the successful marketing firm, the one who always seemed to have everything figured out. "Of course, I'll be there," I said. "Excellent. The address is 1247 Southwest Morrison Street, Suite 400. Please bring a form of identification." After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. I thought about calling Victoria to see if she'd gotten the same call, but something held me back. My sister and I had a complicated relationship. We weren't exactly close, but we weren't enemies either. We were just different. She was the golden child who could do no wrong, and I was the one who was always trying to catch up. I decided to focus on work instead. The coffee shop logo wasn't going to design itself, and I had bills to pay. But as I tried to concentrate on color schemes and typography, my mind kept drifting back to my grandmother. Eleanor Richardson had been an incredible woman. She'd raised 4 children as a single mother after my grandfather died in a construction accident when my father was just 12. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning offices at night and working in a textile factory during the day, to keep the family afloat. She never complained, never asked for help, and somehow managed to put all 4 of her children through college. When I was growing up, she lived in a modest house in southeast Portland, in a neighborhood that was transitioning from working class to trendy. Her house was small, but immaculate, with a garden in the back where she grew tomatoes and roses. She had this ancient couch with floral patterns that she'd bought secondhand in 1978, and she refused to replace it even when the spring started poking through. "This couch has character," she'd say whenever my mother suggested getting a new one. "It's broken in just right." That was Grandma Eleanor. She found value in things that others might overlook. I remember one particular Sunday afternoon when I was about 8 years old. I'd been complaining about how Victoria got a new bike for her birthday, while I got a used one from a garage sale. Grandma Eleanor listened patiently, then took me to her kitchen table where she kept that mason jar full of coins. "Let's count," she said, dumping the coins out. We spent the next hour sorting quarters from dimes, nickels from pennies. My small hands worked alongside her weathered ones, creating neat little stacks of silver and copper. How much do you think we have here? She asked when we were done. I shrugged. Maybe $5. She smiled and started counting. $47.33. Not bad for loose change, right? I was amazed. All those little coins that seemed worthless on their own added up to something substantial. That's the thing about value, Daphne, she said, carefully scooping the coins back into the jar. It's not always obvious at first glance. Sometimes the most important things are the ones people don't notice. At the time, I thought she was just trying to make me feel better about the bike situation. Now, sitting in my apartment with the rain pattering against the windows, I wondered if there was more to that lesson than I'd realized. Friday couldn't come fast enough. I was curious about what my grandmother might have left me. Maybe a piece of jewelry, or some family photos, or perhaps a small monetary gift. I wasn't expecting anything significant. After all, Victoria was the successful one, the one who probably needed money the least, but would likely inherit the most. That's just how these things worked in families like ours. The rest of the week dragged by slowly. I tried to stay busy with work, but I found myself thinking about my grandmother constantly. I remembered how she used to hum while she cooked, how she always had a crossword puzzle half finished on her kitchen counter, how she never missed a single one of my high school art shows even though Victoria was too busy with her college applications to attend. On Thursday night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that phone call, about the will reading, about what might happen. I had this strange feeling in my stomach. Not quite anxiety, not quite excitement, but something in between. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing you're about to jump, but not knowing if you'll fly or fall. Little did I know that in less than 24 hours, everything I thought I knew about my family, my grandmother, and myself would be turned completely upside down. The law offices of Whitmore and Associates occupied the entire 4th floor of a sleek downtown building that screamed expensive legal services. The elevator ride up felt like it took forever, and my palms were sweating by the time I reached the reception desk. The receptionist, a woman in her 50s with perfectly styled gray hair, directed me to a conference room where I found my father and 2 of my uncles already seated around a polished mahogany table. "Daphne," my father stood up and gave me a hug. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" "I'm okay, Dad. Still processing everything." Uncle Mike and Uncle Tom nodded their greetings. We made small talk about work and the weather, but there was an underlying tension in the room. Nobody really knew what to expect from Grandma Eleanor's will, and we were all trying to act casual while secretly wondering what surprises might be in store. At exactly 2 p.m., the conference room door opened, and Victoria walked in. My sister looked every inch the successful businesswoman she was. Perfectly tailored black suit, designer handbag, hair pulled back in an elegant bun. She'd always been beautiful, but success had given her an extra glow that made her seem almost untouchable. She kissed Dad on the cheek and nodded politely to our uncles before her gaze settled on me. "Daphne," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm surprised to see you here." "Why would you be surprised?" I asked, genuinely confused. She shrugged. "I just thought, well, Grandma Eleanor and I had a closer relationship. We talked about business matters, financial planning, that sort of thing. She always said I had a good head for money." Before I could respond, Robert Whitmore entered the room. He was a tall, thin man in his 60s with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades handling sensitive family matters. "Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming." He settled into his chair at the head of the table and opened a thick folder. "I'll get straight to the point. Eleanor Richardson was very specific about her wishes, and I'll be reading the will exactly as she dictated it." He cleared his throat and began reading. The first part was standard legal language, but then he got to the specific bequests. "To my son, Robert Richardson, I leave my house and all its contents, along with my savings account at First National Bank, currently valued at approximately $45,000. My father's eyes widened. That was more than any of us had expected. "To my sons, Michael and Thomas Richardson, I leave equal shares of my investment portfolio, currently valued at approximately $80,000 total." My uncles exchanged glances. Uncle Mike whistled softly under his breath. "To my granddaughter, Victoria Richardson, I leave my jewelry collection and my checking account, currently valued at approximately $15,000. Victoria smiled, but I could see disappointment flicker across her face. She'd clearly been expecting more. Then Mr. Whitmore paused and looked directly at me. To my granddaughter, Daphne Richardson. I leave my coin collection and any associated documentation. The room fell silent. A coin collection? That was it? After all those Sunday afternoons counting coins with Grandma Eleanor, she'd left me. More coins? Victoria actually laughed. A coin collection? Grandma Eleanor collected coins? Apparently so, Mr. Whitmore said diplomatically. I felt my cheeks burning with embarrassment. While everyone else got substantial monetary gifts, I got what sounded like a hobby collection that might be worth a few $100s at most. Is that everything? Dad asked. Yes, that concludes the reading of the will, Mr. Whitmore said. I'll be in touch with each of you regarding the transfer of assets. As everyone began to file out of the conference room, Victoria lingered behind. She waited until we were alone before approaching me. Daphne, I feel terrible about this, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. I had no idea Grandma Eleanor would be so uneven in her distributions. It's fine, Victoria. I wasn't expecting anything anyway. But it's not fine. It's embarrassing. I mean, a coin collection? What are you going to do with that? I shrugged, trying to hide how hurt I was. I don't know. Maybe I'll learn something about coins. Victoria moved closer, lowering her voice. Listen, I have an idea. Why don't you just let me handle the coin collection? I'll have it appraised, and if it's worth anything, I'll give you the money. But honestly, old coins are usually worth face value, unless they're really rare. And let's be realistic. If Grandma Eleanor had valuable coins, she would have mentioned it. Something in her tone made me pause. There was an eagerness there, a pushiness that didn't match her casual suggestion. I appreciate the offer, but I think I'll handle it myself. Don't be silly, Daphne. I have connections in the antique and collectibles world through my business. I can get you a better appraisal than some random coin shop. I said I'll handle it myself. Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold flash in her eyes. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've inherited a jar of pennies. She swept out of the room, leaving me alone with my thoughts, and a growing sense that there was more to this coin collection than met the eye. That evening, I sat in my apartment thinking about the will reading. Everyone else had received substantial gifts. Money, investments, property. I'd received coins. It felt like a cruel joke, except I knew my grandmother wasn't cruel. She was many things. Practical, tough, sometimes blunt, but never cruel. I thought about Victoria's reaction, how quickly she'd offered to help me with the coin collection. In all the years I'd known my sister, she'd never once offered to help me with anything unless there was something in it for her. Her sudden concern for my inheritance seemed out of character. The more I thought about it, the more questions I had. When had Grandma Eleanor started collecting coins? Why had she never mentioned it to anyone? And why had she left them specifically to me? I remembered those Sunday afternoons again, counting coins at her kitchen table. She'd always been so patient, so focused on the task. At the time, I'd thought it was just a way to keep a restless 8-year-old occupied. But what if it had been something more? What if she'd been teaching me something important? Small things add up to big things if you're patient enough. Her words echoed in my mind as I tried to fall asleep that night. I had a feeling I was about to learn exactly what she meant. The next morning, I called Mr. Whitmore's office to arrange a time to collect my inheritance. The receptionist told me I could pick up the coin collection anytime during business hours, along with something called associated documentation that the will had mentioned. I decided to go that afternoon. Whatever my grandmother had left me, I was going to face it head on. Even if it was just a jar of pennies, as Victoria had so snidely suggested, it was mine. And maybe, just maybe, there was more to it than anyone realized. As I got ready to leave my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to discover something that would change everything. My grandmother had been full of surprises in life. Maybe she had one more waiting for me in death. The coin collection turned out to be much more than I'd expected. Mr. Whitmore's assistant led me to a small storage room where 3 medium-sized safety deposit boxes sat on a table, along with a manila envelope marked documentation in my grandmother's careful handwriting. These were in your grandmother's safety deposit box at the bank, the assistant explained. She left specific instructions that they should be given to you unopened. I stared at the boxes, my heart racing. Safety deposit boxes weren't cheap. You didn't rent them for a casual hobby collection. This was something my grandmother had considered valuable enough to protect. "Thank you," I managed to say, signing the required paperwork. I loaded the boxes into my Honda Civic, handling them as carefully as if they contained fine china. The drive back to my apartment felt surreal. 24 hours ago, I'd been embarrassed by my seemingly worthless inheritance. Now I was transporting 3 boxes of unknown contents that my grandmother had kept in a bank vault. Back in my apartment, I cleared off my dining table and arranged the boxes in a row. Then I opened the manila envelope first. Inside were dozens of documents: receipts, certificates of authenticity, insurance appraisals, and what looked like a detailed inventory written in my grandmother's neat handwriting. As I read through the papers, my hands began to shake. The first document was an insurance appraisal dated just 6 months ago. At the top, in bold letters, it read, "Total collection value, $847,000. $847,000. I had to read it 3 times before the number sank in. My grandmother's coin collection was worth almost $1 million. With trembling fingers, I opened the first box. Inside, nestled in felt-lined compartments, were coins unlike anything I'd ever seen. There were gold coins from the 1800s, silver dollars from the early 1900s, and what looked like ancient Roman pieces. Each coin was in its own protective case with a small card detailing its origin and value. The second box contained even more treasures. I found a 1909 SVDB Lincoln cent that the documentation valued at $45,000. There was a 1916 D Mercury dime worth $38,000. And a 1793 chain cent that was appraised at $180,000. But it was the third box that took my breath away. Inside was a single coin in a specially designed case. The documentation identified it as an 1849 double eagle, one of only 2 known to exist. The appraisal listed its value at $425,000. I sat back in my chair, staring at the fortune spread across my dining table. This wasn't just a coin collection. It was a carefully curated investment portfolio that my grandmother had assembled over decades. As I continued reading through the documentation, I began to understand the scope of what she'd accomplished. The earliest receipt was from 1962, when she'd bought her first collectible coin for $12. From there, she'd slowly and methodically built the collection, reinvesting profits and adding new pieces whenever she could afford them. There were notes in the margins of her inventory sheets, written in her careful script. Bought during good month at factory, splurged on 1895 Morgan. Sold 1890 to buy 1893S, better investment. Daphne helped count change today. She has patient hands. That last note was dated from 15 years ago, and it made me cry. Even then, she'd been thinking about me, planning for a future I couldn't have imagined. I spent the next several hours going through every document, every receipt, every appraisal. My grandmother had been meticulous in her record keeping. She'd tracked not just what she owned, but when she'd bought each piece, what she'd paid for it, and how its value had changed over time. As I read, I began to understand the brilliance of her strategy. She hadn't just collected coins randomly. She'd studied the market, identified undervalued pieces, and invested wisely. She'd turned those Sunday afternoon coin-counting sessions into a master class in patience and long-term thinking. But the most shocking discovery came in a sealed envelope at the bottom of the documentation. Inside was a letter addressed to me, written in my grandmother's handwriting. "My dearest Daphne, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've inherited my life's work. I know you're probably confused and overwhelmed right now, but I want you to understand why I chose you for this gift. You were the only one who ever had patience for small things." While Victoria was always focused on the big picture, the immediate rewards, you were content to sit with me and count coins for hours. You understood that value isn't always obvious, and that the most important things often require time and attention to appreciate. I started collecting coins in 1962, shortly after your grandfather died. I was angry and scared, and I needed something to focus on besides my grief. I bought my first collectible coin with money I'd saved from my factory job, a 1921 Morgan silver dollar that cost me $12. It seemed like a foolish purchase at the time, but it gave me something to hope for. Over the years, I continued buying coins whenever I could. I studied the market, learned about grading and authentication, and slowly built what you now see before you. I never told anyone about the collection. because I knew they wouldn't understand. They would have told me to sell, to invest in the stock market, to be more practical. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that the best investments are the ones you can hold in your hands, the ones that have survived centuries of wars and economic collapses and still retain their value. And I knew that the most important lesson I could teach you wasn't about money. It was about patience. Victoria has always been driven by immediate success. She's built a wonderful life for herself, and I'm proud of her. But she's never learned to wait, to let things develop slowly, to find value in the overlooked and underappreciated. You have that gift, Daphne. You've always had it, and now I'm giving you the chance to use it. This collection is worth more than enough to change your life, but I don't want you to sell it all at once. Study it, learn from it, and let it teach you what it taught me about patience and value and the importance of believing in something even when others don't understand. Most importantly, don't let anyone, not Victoria, not anyone else, convince you that you don't deserve this. You spent more time with me than anyone else in the family. You listened to my stories, brought me groceries, and never once asked for anything in return. You earned this through love, not obligation. I know Victoria will probably try to convince you to let her handle the collection. She means well, but she doesn't understand what it represents. This isn't just about money. It's about legacy, about patience, about the value of small things that add up to something extraordinary. The coin you'll find in the third box, the 1849 Double Eagle, is my pride and joy. I bought it 20 years ago when the seller didn't realize what he had. I paid $500 for a coin worth nearly $500,000. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that value isn't always obvious, and that the most important discoveries often come to those who are patient enough to look closely. I love you, my dear granddaughter. Use this gift wisely, and remember that the most valuable things in life are often the ones that others overlook. With all my love, Grandma Eleanor. P.S. There's one more thing. Check the back of the photograph in the manila envelope. You'll find information about an account I set up for you. It's not much compared to the coin collection, but it should help with any immediate expenses while you figure out what to do next. I turned over the photograph she'd mentioned. A picture of us from one of those Sunday afternoons. Both of us smiling over a table full of sorted coins. Taped to the back was a bank account number and a note. Emergency fund, $50,000, for my patient granddaughter who deserves more than anyone realizes. I set the letter down and looked around my modest apartment, at the secondhand furniture, the coffee-stained carpet, the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen counter. In the space of a few hours, I'd gone from worrying about rent to being worth almost $1 million. But more than that, I'd discovered that my grandmother had seen something in me that I'd never seen in myself. She'd recognized a quality I didn't even know I possessed, and had spent decades preparing a gift that would validate its importance. As I sat surrounded by centuries-old coins and documentation that represented a lifetime of careful planning, I finally understood what my grandmother had been trying to teach me all those years ago. Small things do add up to big things, if you're patient enough to let them. And tomorrow, I was going to find out just how patient I really was. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I was living in someone else's life. The coin collection was still spread across my dining table, but in the daylight, it felt even more surreal. I'd gone to bed as struggling graphic designer Daphne Richardson and woken up as almost millionaire Daphne Richardson. The transition was jarring. I decided to start my day with coffee and careful planning. I needed to understand exactly what I'd inherited, how to protect it, and what my next steps should be. I was halfway through my second cup when my phone rang. "Daphne, it's Victoria. How are you doing today?" Her voice had that artificially cheerful tone she used when she wanted something. After yesterday's discovery, I was more attuned to the subtle manipulations in her behavior. "I'm fine, Victoria. What's up? I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I feel terrible about how things went. I talked to Marcus last night. Marcus was her husband, a financial advisor, and he reminded me that even modest coin collections can sometimes have hidden value. I'd hate for you to miss out on something important because you don't have the right expertise." I almost laughed. If she only knew what I'd discovered. "That's thoughtful of you, but I'm handling it." "Are you sure? I mean, no offense, but you've never dealt with appraisals or estate valuations before. These things can be complicated, and there are tax implications to consider. Marcus has contacts who specialize in estate sales, They could handle everything for you. The appraisal, the sale, the tax paperwork. You wouldn't have to worry about any of it. Her pushiness was becoming more obvious by the minute. Victoria, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not planning to sell anything right now. There was a pause. What do you mean you're not planning to sell? Daphne, you can't just sit on a coin collection. It's not practical. You need to convert it to cash so you can actually use it. Who says I need to use it right away? Because you're living paycheck to paycheck. You drive a car that's falling apart, you live in a tiny apartment, and you're always stressed about money. This inheritance, whatever it's worth, could solve those problems, but only if you handle it properly. I felt a flash of anger, and I suppose you think I'm not capable of handling it properly on my own. I didn't say that. I just think you could use some help, some professional guidance. From your husband's contacts. Yes, from people who know what they're doing. Look, Daphne, I know you're proud, but this isn't about pride. It's about making smart financial decisions. I stood up and walked to my dining table, looking at the 1849 Double Eagle that was worth more than Victoria's luxury car. You know what's interesting, Victoria? Yesterday you laughed at the idea of Grandma Eleanor having a coin collection. You acted like it was some kind of joke. But now, less than 24 hours later, you're very concerned about me handling it properly. I was just surprised, that's all. I didn't expect Grandma Eleanor to be into collectibles, right? So you had no idea she collected coins? Of course not. When would I have seen them? She never mentioned it. I picked up one of the inventory sheets from my grandmother's documentation. That's funny, because according to her notes, she showed you her 1921 Morgan silver dollar in 2018. She wrote that you weren't impressed and suggested she should spend the money on something practical instead. The silence on the other end of the phone was deafening. Victoria, are you there? I might have forgotten about that. It was years ago. She also notes that you asked her about her investment portfolio last Christmas. She wrote that you seemed very interested in numbers, but that she didn't feel comfortable sharing details. Daphne, what are you getting at? I'm getting at the fact that you knew she had something valuable, but you didn't know what. And now you're trying to manipulate me into letting you and your husband handle it. That's not true. I'm trying to help you. No, you're trying to help yourself. You're hoping I'll be so overwhelmed that I'll just hand everything over to you and Marcus, and then you'll discover what I discovered yesterday. What did you discover yesterday? The question slipped out before she could stop herself, and I knew I had her. I discovered that my grandmother was a lot smarter than any of us gave her credit for. I discovered that she spent 60 years building something extraordinary, and I discovered that she chose me to inherit it for a very specific reason. Daphne, you're being dramatic. It's a coin collection. How extraordinary could it be? Extraordinary enough that it's worth more than your house. Another silence. Then, what are you talking about? I'm talking about the fact that Grandma Eleanor's coin collection is worth $847,000. I'm talking about the fact that she left me a fortune, and you're trying to trick me into handing it over. I heard her intake of breath. That's impossible. I have the insurance appraisal right here. Would you like me to read it to you? You're lying. Am I? Then why are you so desperate to get your hands on it? Victoria's mask finally slipped completely. Because I deserve it more than you do, she shouted. I'm the one who's successful. I'm the one who knows how to handle money. I'm the one who could actually do something meaningful with that kind of inheritance. And there it is, I said quietly. The truth. You don't understand, Daphne. I have plans. Big plans. I'm trying to expand my business and I need capital. That money could change everything for me. It could change everything for me too. But you'll just waste it. You'll quit your job and spend it all on art supplies and coffee shop logos. You don't have the discipline to preserve wealth. Like Grandma Eleanor did? That's different. She was from a different generation. She understood sacrifice. I looked at the letter my grandmother had left me, at her words about patience and value, and the importance of believing in something even when others don't understand. She understood something else too, I said. She understood that the most valuable things are often the ones that others overlook. Like granddaughters who spend their Sunday afternoons counting coins. This is ridiculous. You can't just keep $1 million coin collection in your crappy apartment. Actually, I can. I've already made arrangements to transfer it to a proper safety deposit box. and I've contacted a reputable numismatist to help me understand the full scope of what I've inherited. You're making a mistake, Daphne. You're not equipped to handle this kind of responsibility. Maybe not. But I'm going to learn. The same way Grandma Eleanor learned. Slowly, carefully, with patience. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize you're in over your head. I won't. But Victoria, next time you want to manipulate someone, you might want to make sure they don't have access to 60 years of meticulous documentation that proves your grandmother was a lot smarter than you thought. I hung up the phone and sat back down at my dining table. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I'd just stood up to my sister in a way I'd never done before. Over the next few hours, I carefully repacked the coins and documentation. I'd already called the bank to arrange for a larger safety deposit box, and I had an appointment with a numismatist that afternoon. I was going to do this right, the way my grandmother would have wanted. As I worked, I kept thinking about her letter, about the lessons she'd tried to teach me through all those Sunday afternoons. She'd been preparing me for this moment my entire life, teaching me that value wasn't always obvious, that patience was a skill worth developing, and that the most important things often came to those who were willing to wait. The coin collection wasn't just an inheritance. It was a validation of everything she'd seen in me that I'd never seen in myself. She'd recognized qualities I didn't even know I possessed, and had spent decades preparing a gift that would prove their worth. That afternoon, as I sat in the numismatist's office getting my education in rare coins and market values, I thought about Victoria's words. She'd said I wasn't equipped to handle this kind of responsibility. Maybe she was right. Maybe I wasn't equipped. Yet. But I was going to learn. I was going to study and plan and make careful decisions. I was going to honor my grandmother's legacy by being the person she'd believed I could become. And every time I looked at those coins, those small, seemingly insignificant pieces of metal that had accumulated into something extraordinary, I would remember her most important lesson, that the most valuable things in life are often the ones that others overlook, and that patience, more than anything else, is what transforms ordinary moments into something precious. My grandmother had spent her life counting coins, but she'd been counting on me. Now it was my turn to prove that her faith had been well placed. The jar of coins we'd counted together all those years ago had been worth 47 or 33, but the lesson we'd shared was priceless. And now, finally, I understood what she'd been trying to teach me all along. Small things do add up to big things, if you're patient enough to let them.